and do a wonderful, wonderful welcome everyone to our spring 2023 series of Tuesday Times Roundtable. TTR is the Office of Global Learning Initiative's flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on current global issues and trends. You can learn more about TTR. You can watch past recordings, or you can come back and reference this one at go.fiu.edu/TTR. My name is Michelle Zaldivar, your Senior Program Coordinator here at the Office of Global Learning. A special thank you to our Assistant Director in charge of Student Programming, Anna Prado, who's monitoring the chat for us once that actually does get going and answering your questions as they come in. If you haven't already, please take a moment to sign in. So this sign in is where we will capture your attendance. Whether you're here for engagement points, class credit, or just discovering TTR and the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, we're glad you're here and we encourage you to follow us on our social media at GoGlobalFIU. To ground us in our discussion today, The World's Women, an international look at women's rights, we have a question that we would like everyone to respond to. What do you think are essential elements of women's empowerment, either personally, in the workforce, or in civic engagement? We'll be using your responses to frame the discussion, and we will be using the same platform for the Q&A portion later in today's session. So make sure you log in using the QR code or by visiting menti.com and entering the code 62208749. Some of our discussion questions today may prompt the sharing of really sensitive personal experiences. We encourage you to share your experiences as freely as you would like, but remind you that these sessions are recorded. If you would prefer to share your thoughts privately with either myself or Anna in the chat, please feel free to do so. TTR is brought to you through a formal partnership with the New York Times, which provides everyone in our FIU community with free digital subscription. Every TTR is tied to a New York Times article. You can read today's article at go.fiu.edu/TTR0404. If you haven't activated your subscription, you can do that at accessnyt.com. A quick shout out to another event that we're hosting this week. On Thursday, April 6th, we welcome UNICEF USA staff and some of their Miami volunteers to our MMC campus for a participatory training to learn about child rights, their importance, and how to implement them in your work. You can join us over at GC 305 on Thursday, April 6th, 12:30 p.m. to learn more. And officially into our discussion today, moderating our discussion is Raquel Perez, Associate Teaching Professor and Senior Faculty Member for the Florida Global Strategic Communications Graduate Program, Center for Labor Research Studies, CASE, and SIPA here at Florida International University. Dr. Perez is an operational performance advisor, speaker, and educator with a PhD in conflict analysis and resolution. And she's joined today by a group of esteemed panelists: Abigail, Canales, Ibarra. Abigail, did I say? Yeah, serves as the Partnerships Manager for the Millennium Campus Network with United Nations Academic Impact, where she leads a strategic partnership to ensure the organization's sustainability and growth. A former Millennium Fellow herself, Dr. Canales is passionate about improving the current situation in our world and volunteers on a number of social projects in Mexico, her local country that she's out of and joining us from today. She was a 2018 Millennium Fellow at Universidad de Monterrey and currently serves as a mentor at Millennium Fellowship's IEE program. Allyson McKinney Timm is a human rights lawyer, scholar, and faith leader with 2 decades of experience defending the dignity and rights of those in the margins in the United States and globally. Allyson holds professional degrees in law and business from Georgetown University and is ordained as a ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church in the US. Her work promoting justice and equality has spanned the nonprofit, private, and academic sectors and led her to found Justice Revival, which advocates for human rights informed by Christian values. Susanne Zwingel is an associate professor here at SIPA at FIU with research interests in the international women's rights norms and their translation, public gender policies and gender equality advocacy around the world, global governance and gender, feminist constructivist and post-colonial international relations theories, gender and armed conflict, and interpretive methodologies. She earned her PhD in political science from Ruhr University in Bochum, Germany, and an MA in politics and sociology from Hamburg University, Germany. There's one more panelist that we are hoping may have come. I haven't been able to check out the participants tab to see if she has been able to join us. But if she is able to make it today, and we are reaching out to her, we thank her very, very dearly for her time, Fawzia Koofi, and we will do her full introduction when she does arrive, if she's able to make it today. Thank you so much, and I hand it over to our esteemed panelists and our moderator, Raquel.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and for being here. And thank you, panelists, for having Abigail, Allyson, Susanne here. This is, first of all, this is an amazing turnout. And to be a part of a panel with so many powerhouses that are passionate about advocacy and taking a look at the scope of how we can strengthen women in different capacities, right? So I've been taking a look at the Mentimeter audience, and it seems like we haven't gotten a couple of questions yet. So let's make sure to dive in, because the discussion we have is going to be led by you. So the things you want to talk about, the areas you want to focus in, we're going to be able to capture it by the question that we're asking, okay? So making sure, thinking about it, right? What do you think are the essential elements of women's empowerment? This could be personally, in the workforce, and in civic engagement. So while you're going ahead and entering in these amazing responses, I'm actually then going to go over to the panelists really quick and say, you know, based on this question, your area of specialty, the work that you do, how close are you in proximity, or in what aspect of proximity are you to this actual question? So I'll go ahead and lead it off, so then that way we can kind of jump from space to space. So as Michelle mentioned, I have a background in conflict, and my area of expertise is actually organizational conflict. So I tend to look a lot when it comes to the scope of women empowerment in the areas of women in leadership, women breaking through glass ceilings, taking a look at resources for women in the workforce, and how we can help improve performance within these different spaces. So I do, you know, I do a lot of work conflict, obviously. So having those different elements, and especially taking a look at empowering women to empower one another, we could definitely dive into those different conversations. So in that question, in that space, this is kind of the area I work in within that area of women empowerment. So let's go over to Susanne.
Hi, thank you for making me part of this. Quick question back. So are we also supposed to answer this question here? Or just like,
yeah,
okay, great.
From your professional scope, what area, right?
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you. I'm really impressed with the turnout. That's a very big audience, even if it doesn't feel like this sitting directly in front of the computer, right? So as you heard, I mean, I'm a professor here at FIU. I teach about global women's movements. I teach also a lot about and do research on, you know, how societies organize around gender. And as you can imagine, that's very different around the world, but there's also a lot of commonalities, right? And when I looked at this question, I thought about it a lot, and I thought, as different as societies around the world are, it seems to me one thing that they have in common, and I mean, we used to call this patriarchy, perhaps we still do, but I think I want to call this a little bit different, using a different term that I find sort of more useful, which is, I think what many women have in common is that they are, as people, as voices, and also as, you know, in terms of the work that they do, they are actually devalued. So who they are, what they say, the work that they do, doesn't get the value, doesn't get the recognition that they should get, right? And that's, of course, very disempowering. And when I say this, I'm thinking about incidences of violence against women, which I think oftentimes is based on this fact that women can be treated this way, that women are sort of not really fully human, that women can be treated like objects or like possession, right? Oftentimes what women say is not taken very seriously in comparison to men. If you think about political spaces, I think this is often very visible. And then in terms of work, and you know, and here we talk about the workforce, I mean, we all know about the undervaluation of women's work, which comes to us in the form of the gender pay gap. But also women do a lot of work that's actually not paid at all, which is care work, which is work in our families, which is work that's care work for others, and that's very, very necessary for communities to actually survive. But that work is very undervalued. Or not valued at all. And I think that's sort of the basis. And I think in terms of getting to a more empowered position, what I've seen is usually that works really well when women get together collectively, not as individuals, but together to make those points and to make claims and to try to change them. So I think women's movements, and there are many different ones around the world, they are the big driver in terms of women's empowerment.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're going to go over to Allyson now.
Thank you, Raquel. It's great to be with you, and I'm grateful for the invitation. So when I think about women's empowerment in the context of my work, I want to draw out two themes. Really, the focus of the work we're doing right now at Justice Revival is convening an advocacy campaign to support finalizing the Equal Rights Amendment to the US Constitution. It's 100 years old this year, a very basic provision, 24 words that would prohibit rights being denied or abridged based on sex. Almost all countries in the world have a provision like this. The US is one of just about 25 that lacks explicit constitutional protection for women's rights or an explicit prohibition on discrimination based on sex. So right now, that is one clear focus of the work that I'm doing and we're doing at Justice Revival. And that is a very widely shared principle, equality under the law. It's a basic human rights norm. It's a basic democratic norm. And it bears very closely on some of the issues previously mentioned on violence against women, on pay equity, on a whole host of ways that women are disadvantaged. The other element to my work in particular, you heard that I'm a faith leader, and actually I imagine some people might have been surprised about that, or there's certainly a lot of skepticism of religion within the women's movement for understandable reasons. And that's part of why we are doing this work as a faith movement and an interfaith campaign to stand up for full gender equality. And it's important because there has been this history of religious resistance to women's equality. We could even say it more strongly, the role that particular religious interpretations have played in reinforcing an idea of women's inferiority and contributing to women's subjugation under the law. And so that's deeply concerning to me. So we're part of this political struggle for equal rights, but underneath that, I believe there are important theological questions about whether women's lives matter. So I do this work because I want to testify women's lives do matter deeply, and we want them to matter to the United States and our Constitution.
Thank you so much. And I already have so many questions for you. So we're going to definitely go circle back there. And Abigail, how would you in context respond to this question as far as your area of expertise?
Thank you so much. I think there's like two important things to cover. First off, like our inner selves as to empower ourselves as women, and then the other thing is like the team work that we need to with sorority to work. I think it's so important to recognize the global intersectionality, at least for example in my work, because it recognizes that women's experiences of oppression and discrimination are shaped not just by their gender, but actually other factors as race, class, sexuality, nationality, religion, and ability. So acknowledging all women's experiences of gender inequality are not the same everywhere, and that the fight for gender equality must take into account the complex ways in which different forms of oppression intersect and interact. I think that's how we can recognize also the voices and experiences of women from all backgrounds, and not taken by as a centralized feminism, but also like a decolonized. Even if we have, for example, at the Millennium Fellowship, thousands of women from all different backgrounds, cultures, countries, we all are women, and we have to speak up for ourselves. And that's why I would love to also recognize the inner selves, to speak your truth, to embrace what you are, who you are, where you came from. And that's also how you can, with sorority, empathize with your sisters all around the world. Because even if we are culturally very different, we are all women fighting against gender inequalities.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And the responses are coming in and they're amazing. So I want to kind of dive into the responses and then see where they kind of lead us. So there's a common theme that I'm seeing emerge, and that's access to education, right? And I think sometimes, you know, when we're here in these kind of settings and these elements, we think like anybody can go to school, right? But there's different hurdles and challenges and the impact of that. So I don't know which panelist wants to kind of tackle the role of education within their space as far as the work that they do. And then we could kind of go from there. So who would like to chime in first? Okay, let's go with Allyson.
You know, I think it's an appropriate starting point, because education is sort of a primary hurdle for girls and women in so many places. My mind goes to other countries where I've worked on women's rights. I'm thinking about several countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I spent a number of years in Uganda representing widows and orphans unlawfully thrown from their homes. And in that context, the type of education that was meaningful was education about their rights, community legal education. So what that looked like for us was going out into rural or peri-urban settings in a very grassroots way, trying to raise awareness about rights that women and children have under law, as an initial step toward supporting stronger rule of law. And I think, you know, we could apply that to the United States. I'll just give one other example. I do presentations on the ERA frequently. Most people don't know that the ERA is not yet part of the US Constitution. People assume that it is. Polls show a majority of people believe it is. And so we have a gap in important education right here in the US as well.
Wow. And I think those people, and I love that, first of all, how you pointed out being educated on our rights, right? A lot of times, you know, and whether it is a legal right or how sometimes we're culturally bound, right? And if we take a look, for example, at individuals that we come to the US from all different places, or whatever that mentality as far as a religious belief kind of guides us, right? It's this idea of, I can do that? Like, why do I have to, you know, kind of be the caretaker or have this role or have those different elements and so I really love that piece of knowing your rights. And I when you were speaking initially, I really was fascinated at the fact that we're still having this conversation, and to your point that we think that it's part of our Constitution. So why do you think we're still here 100 years later?
There has been a pitched battle, a serious culture war that's being fought down to this moment, and there is serious committed resistance to the principle of gender equality in the Constitution. I saw it a few weeks ago when the Senate Judiciary Committee held the first hearing in a number of decades on this issue, and there was fierce opposition. If we had a sociologist on the panel, we could plumb the depths of really why that is. But, you know, I'm a lawyer, not a sociologist or psychologist, but if I were guessing, it seems to me that there's tremendous fear and misapprehension and resistance to a more equal society where women share power and share opportunities in a measure that's commensurate with our gifts and our potential. And that's unfortunate because we know, and I think everyone here knows well, that everyone loses when we don't have gender equality, and that the society as a whole is who benefits when we can empower women.
Wow, that is 100%. And so, Susanne, I'm going to jump over to you because you said something very important. And in capturing our students' responses, our participants' responses, there's a lot of like a conversation about self-worth and talking about those experiences. And you said something, the patriarch versus devaluation. So can you tell us, unpack that a little bit more for us as to why you think that that's the more appropriate experience to kind of label it?
Yeah, thank you. If I may, I just wanted to congratulate Allyson that she does this important work about the ERA. I think that's fantastic. I actually did talk in my class the other day about it, and I had the same experience, you know, because of the Senate committee meeting, and students were like, "What? We don't have this. We don't have this. Doesn't everybody have this?" Right? It was exactly as you described, right? And then
Thank you for teaching about it.
Yeah, well, it's a sad thing to teach, but you have to, right? And then I just wanted to make one quick point about the focus on education, and just also support what Allyson said. I mean, you know, the right to education is really the right to develop fully as a person, right? And that's important for everybody and at every age level. And I mean, we see what it does if we take this right back currently in Afghanistan. And I think we have our speaker from Afghanistan just joining, which is wonderful. But I also just wanted to say, from in a global comparison, actually education, access to education, I think is the right for women, or the global gender equality norm that has been most successful, because there has been, it's sort of in a way the least opposed. There is, many people see good reasons for educating girls and opening doors for them, right? So I think that's also something to recognize. That's not as controversial as other rights for women. And what often happens is that you actually have countries where women are more educated than men. They are having a higher level of education, but they still earn less, and they still have less access to you know, meaningful and well-paid employment. And that gap, I think, is also important to keep in mind. I mean, you know, what kind of doors are actually open for you? And then to your specific question, Raquel, I mean, I still talk about patriarchy. I think this is or also androcentrism, which I think this is a good term to say, to make clear that oftentimes what we consider normal in societies is actually an understanding of universalism, of, like, you know, everybody is included, that's in fact based on male experience. It's in fact based on androcentrism, right? And I think that's I think for some easy to understand, but I think increasingly I feel this does not only mean that women are less paid attention to or less considered, but I think it contains actually an active act of devaluing what women stand for and what women experience and what they say and what they do. And yeah, I think that's a little bit of a controversial perspective, perhaps, because it's a little, you know, it points to a conflict, and it points to the need to change that. But I think it's important to make things a little bit more visible.
Absolutely. This is so great. I'm going to chime to Michelle really quick, and then I have Abigail, you're up next.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Yes, after a whirlwind, a little bit of a roller coaster of trying to get into Zoom and the chaos of what that is on the back end, Fawzia Koofi is here, and I just want to take a second and read out her introduction, if that's okay. So
Yes.
Fawzia Koofi is a parliamentary lawmaker, accomplished author, and advocates for the rights of women and children, democracy, and moderate Islam. She is the first female in Afghan parliament to be elected the second deputy speaker, served as vice president of the National Assembly, and was a member of the Afghan delegation negotiating peace with the Taliban at Doha, Qatar. She is currently a senior leadership fellow at FIU, leading the study group Women in Leadership, the Fight for Democracy and Freedom in Post-Conflict Societies, and is generous enough to make her available to the rest of the FIU community and joining us today. Thank you so much, Fawzia, for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here.
As a general reminder to anyone else, if you're also having trouble with the Zoom, getting kicked out or coming back in, or if there's anything that's an issue there, all of our TTRs are recorded and you will be able to access them at our
Oh, you muted for a second.
You're
Michelle.
muted,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Zoom. We'll do this. So that TTR YouTube playlist is go.fiu.edu/TTR YouTube. All of our recordings are posted and you can always come back and watch this later on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And so Abigail, I know, obviously the role of education, we're going to bring that in as well, but in combination of that, because I saw a lot of our participants responding in those things of empathy, independence, confidence, things of that nature. And you did such an eloquent way of explaining the experiences, how they're all valuable, but on top of that, the inner voice, right? Like taking up that space. And that's not always easy for women, right? So if you could tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of combines in the space of education as well.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. Well, of course, with education, education helps people to recognize their own biases and privileges, right? So if you can have access to that, you become active allies and advocates for gender equality, and it also helps to empower women and girls by providing them with the knowledge and tools they need to change gender equality and stereotypes and discrimination. I think this is pretty powerful, and I know we start talking also about patriarchy and how systems used to oppress not just rights, but also ideas and categorize women into stereotypes that are actually ideas of men for many years. So it is actually very common to have this, for example, imposter syndrome between girls and women that are trying to do something, but as we don't fit in every single stereotype centralized, we need to break them, and that's why I mentioned around embrace who we are, what we want, even if you are a rebel, right? I recognize myself as a rebel, for example. Why? Because I don't actually fit into the society that or the Mexican culture that is stereotyped on. I'm a queer woman, so that's actually like another thing that could come into the intersectionalism and feminism around. I'm not just a woman, I'm also queer, so we have to find out how to complement our agendas so different people with different privileges and unprivileges could have this access to opportunities and to fit into a world that is only trying to segment women into stereotypes. So hard to reach. But if we embrace ourselves, our ideas, ourselves in general, we can fight against those ideas and go and chase our dreams, our opportunities, our rights.
Absolutely. And that's so well said as far as those different elements. And Fawzia, how would you, I hope you're still here. Can you hear me? I want to make sure you're still with us. Okay. All right. So while we're waiting for that.
Are you referring to me?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Yes.
because I haven't heard. Yeah, sure.
Oh, no. Yeah, can you turn on your camera so that way we could kind of all be within that space to get, thank you. So in your line of work and what you do in your experiences, what role, what impact, what need do we have for women in education and continuing on with the education in that space, in any space, actually?
Yes, thank you so much once again. Thank you, Michelle, for having me. Thank you, Raquel, if I pronounce your name correctly, and I'm sorry if I'm not. I just arrived to London today from Miami, and I was like hoping, finger crossed that I get on time before the panel start, but I think I missed a little bit of it because of the connection and because of the London traffic. So I basically just arrived an hour ago. Well, in the case of women's rights, women's empowerment and education, obviously Afghanistan, unfortunately, is a life example of, how suppression of women mean to the rest of the world, to the country's security, to the country's economy, to the country's prosperity, democracy, and all the values that at least the participants in this webinar stand for and believe in. Because I'm a live example of, if I was not educated, where would I have been, as opposed to the fact that I am educated and, millions of my sisters in Afghanistan don't have that opportunity. I believe education is prerequisite for any progress in a society. By educating a woman, you do not only educate, as they say, you do not only educate a woman, but you educate a society. Now, the question is whether education is a service delivery by a government, or it's part of the fundamental right that, regardless of what the government policies should be, every individual should have access to quality education. In Afghanistan, we know that that women no longer are allowed to go to university and school. And for people who are in this Zoom, and for the students at FIU, when I speak about this, it's hard to resonate. In 21st century, under the name of religion and under the name of tradition, the misogynistic powers try to eliminate women. And the easy way to eliminate women is from education, by depriving them from education. Because I believe if you commit a genocide, the generation will come back. The next generation will come back, will re-emerge. But if you want to really genocide the nation, you just deprive them from education. And that's what is Taliban doing right now in Afghanistan. That's what they do by depriving women, because they know an educated mother will never allow her son, her husband, her brother to join these military extremist groups to fight, to become a terrorist. And that's why they have targeted the right part of the society in that sense. They have launched their war against women, and in 5 years' time, it's sad to say that unfortunately, if this continue, the repressive Taliban measure against girls' education continue, in 5 years' time, we will literally have no woman graduating from high school, and that means no woman entering the job force, the labor force of any kind of skills, because we know Taliban don't allow women to work, but obviously they do have their own ways of engaging by using technology, by online platforms, by entrepreneurship skills. The women find their ways, because women of today are not the women of the time that Taliban were in power first time. So they find their way. Last 20 years has given them that opportunity to transform, to connect, to know what does it mean to be an empowered woman. And so therefore Taliban know how to target that. Now, I think in the case of Afghanistan, it's completely different. We do provide to use some of the small opportunities, windows of opportunities to provide online education, online education will never replace actual, in-class education. So we should not actually try to normalize the situation by advocating for online education. Although we now use the opportunity, we provide online education, including involving some FIU students to provide online English classes to the girls inside Afghanistan. We have tried to connect them, but I think it's for us at the global community, especially all these women leaders, to pose this question to the rest of the world, to the leaders, to whoever policymakers they are, that is this really normal in 21st century to see a power is depriving women from their basic rights of education, work, of their being, of their existence, under the name of religion, while we are all part of this global community and we have committed ourselves to the international human rights principle, and we are silent. And we try to engage with Taliban in a way or the other to change them. I negotiated with Taliban. I know that change is something Taliban, which means if Taliban really change, it means they will dissolve. There will be no existence of Taliban. So therefore, I think in the case of Afghanistan, I'm sorry that I have given that a negative perspective, but this is the reality. By educating a society, you actually try to create a middle ground platform. While the world has become so extreme, how do we bring that middle ground? Is through education, through women, through bringing all of these values together. So it's time for us to bring all these values together and stand in solidarity meaningfully with those women in deprived and marginalized communities, including Afghanistan, but also other countries in conflict. Thank you.
First of all, your experience, your passion is, yes, Abigail's clapping 100%. And you brought up, I think a lot of times we get caught up in the day-to-day, and leaning on Allyson and Susanne for a second when they're talking about women's rights in the US. And we sometimes take, what do you mean? I thought this was already kind of all resolved, right? And that we're still like 100 years deep trying to figure this out. And we take for granted the opportunities we have here sometimes of being able to go to school freely and to have those elements, because we do understand the power of education. Now, you also said something, Fawzia, that I think is important, and we're going to kind of unpack through our different lenses and expertise, is the joining together of voices. And one of the common themes, another common theme I'm seeing in the responses is very much becoming a unified voice as women, right? Coming together and having those different pieces. So, from my aspect, from the organizational lens, right, the biggest challenge in organizations isn't so much a devaluing or patriarch kind of piece. It's a lot of times women not aligning with other women, right? Whether they're seeing it as a competition, whether we have different values, whether we have a different cultural upbringing, whatever the case may be. So in your areas of expertise, can we talk about some of the issues you see emerge as far as women collaborating, right, or coming together, and some ways we could kind of get over, some of your ideas, insights, tips in order how we can get past those type of hurdles and really become a unified voice? And I'm going to go ahead and go with Abigail first on this one.
Thank you so much, Raquel. I think it's huge important to talk about this issue. I mean, if even being a woman and respecting the human rights of women means essentially recognizing and protecting their life to live free, to a life free of discrimination, violence, and exploitation. So if we try to ensure women to have equal access to education, healthcare, employment, and political representation, as you mentioned, we can actually talk around our own privileges and in our own perspective. But that's why I remarked this thing about working in team as in intersectionality, decolonizing perspective, global perspective, because even if we have different agendas depending on our own countries, we have also the same urge to fight against gender equality, because this has not been eradicated in any part of the world, unfortunately. So yeah, fighting for gender equality requires an extensive collective action and sorority among all people who support gender justice, but also people who don't, because of many things. But we have to stay strong between these, regardless of our even gender or agenda. And that's why it's also important to find our safe spaces, to find our circles, to build alliances and coalitions across different communities and movements, to create a broader network of support on gender equality, even if it's national or international, listening to other women, empathizing with them. I think the most important value here is also empathy. Empathy is what could save us from dying on gender equality as women. So yeah, definitely the fight for gender equality requires a multifaceted approach that involves people from all walks of life, and we have to get involved outside of sorority membership from all over the world.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Susanne, what are your thoughts on it?
Great question, right? Okay, so I want to say, so I consider myself a feminist. I have been working a lot in women's organizations, women's movements. I connect a lot. I'm, however, also very committed to intersectionality, and thank you, Abigail, for pointing that out. That's very important. I think our goal has to be to work for societies that are fair and along all axes, right? So it's about gender equality, but it's also about many other dimensions of equality and social justice that we want to work for. So in that sense, I'm not sure if the description that you provided, Raquel, saying like, women in business settings, they fight against each other. I mean, I'm not surprised that happens, because everybody is affected by a system of hierarchy and patriarchy or racial exclusion. We are all socialized into it, right? So it's not just because we are women, we do everything right and we are the, on the right side of justice in a way. So we are socialized into those things. And of course, if you're in a hierarchical setting, somehow you want to make it up the ladder, right? And this comes back, I think, also to the idea of devaluation of women. If you compete against women, it's really about, you want to rise up in an order where what women have to say and what women stand for is not sufficiently recognized, I think. So I think it should be, what we should be working for is to think about inclusion, equality, social justice on many levels. And I just wanted to also add a little thing here, because I study the UN and global dimensions and so forth. The UN has had for a long time, and you know this well, the sustainable development idea and so forth. But there's by now also this report that's the Global Happiness Report. Maybe you have heard about that. And the countries that come out with the best ranks and with the best overall situation for living a happy life in them, those are all countries that are very gender equal, and as close as you can come to that. But they are also equal on many other levels. So they have a lot of infrastructure in terms of supporting people who are perhaps not the most competitive, and people who are in need, and they have sort of social safety nets and things like that. So I think all of those things, a good enough life for everybody, that's what we as women should be fighting for, but perhaps everybody should be fighting for.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Fawzia, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Raquel. I would like to highlight 3-4 points here. First of all, we must appreciate the fact that there is such an invisible, strong power in unity. We don't see it, but the moment we unite, we know that we can change. So be mindful of that. Second, the reason that that the women have this competitive environment among each other is, again, because the resources are so limited to the woman, and the positions and the opportunities are so limited that we are made to compete with each other. And in fact, in some countries, when, for instance, they have quotas for elections, quota for parliamentary election, for local elections, etc., so that women only compete with each other. This is what we had in Afghanistan. We had parliamentary quota of 25% women in parliament, which bring us to the corner where only women will talk about women's rights and compete with each other. While women's rights is about, as I said before, security of the country. It's about economy of a country. And that's why I never actually, in my time when I ran for parliament, I never tried to get a quota seat. I always tried to get a general seat and compete with men because, the resources they control and they try to give us a little bit so that we fight over that. So I think financial inclusion is so important for us to, that's the first step for women, social, political independence. Financial meaningful inclusion is the first step. Second, the realization that the world is so unjust. And in fact, in major, democracies in the world, we still are struggling to get women to the senior leadership positions and to the CEO positions. That realization is important for us as a unity point, as a point to unite us. And then last point, we must be mindful that injustice anywhere could be injustice everywhere. The fact that there is a repressive measure in Afghanistan against women. As I was talking to you, I got a tweet from a journalist that today Taliban banned women who were female staff, national staff who were working with UN in Afghanistan. They banned them from coming to the UN. As somebody who lived in Afghanistan under the Taliban and experienced this, I only feel that pain. I know it's not even about you losing the job. It's about, as a woman, based on your gender, you feel the humiliation. You feel that you're being disregarded. You're being regarded as nobody. So therefore, I think we must realize that if this is happening in Afghanistan, tomorrow it could be anywhere in our workspace, in our life space, in different forms. And therefore, we must be mindful of that and stand meaningfully against that, because I think we have this sense that as long as we have a job, we have a computer, we have an office, we have an income, that's fine. There is no sense of, struggle, change. That revolution that we brought, no longer there. How can we bring that? How can we replace the sense of satisfaction to the sense of struggle? Ask for more, always unite with each other. Thank you.
The excellent points. Thank you so much. Allyson, what are your thoughts?
A couple points as well, and I'm just absorbing the really rich insights that my fellow panelists have shared. I think there is this desire to both form bonds of solidarity and movements of solidarity to promote women's inclusion, equality, and empowerment, while at the same time respecting the particular cultural and personal context that different women are coming from. So again, Abigail brought in intersectionality and needing to be mindful that based on a culture, ethnic, class background, women may have different priorities. We know we'll have different priorities, needs, struggles. And so I think it's both respecting particularity, creating solidarity. And there is also the challenge that there are some women who are not advocating women's empowerment or equality. There is a backlash. There are women and very many men who are part of an anti-feminist movement. There was a woman member of Congress who testified against the ERA, a senator, a US senator, just a few weeks ago. So we could name, very present examples. And so while we're aspiring toward women's solidarity, I think the guiding principles of human equality and human rights are essential to still maintain in the foreground, because solidarity at the expense of those principles would be hollow and perhaps self-defeating. And maybe I could just make one more point, because I'm so moved by what Fawzia has shared. And I think as we've watched the difficult struggle for women and girls in Afghanistan. I know, the world is grieving with you over the repression that has been revived under this Taliban rule. I am also concerned and mindful of the danger of those in the United States who would use that as a sort of red herring to say, oh, well, we don't need to enshrine equality because perhaps the US is in a relatively better position in terms of women's equality. And to me, that is such a deep betrayal of the struggles of women everywhere, that if we're concerned about what's happening to women in Afghanistan or Iran, what's essential is to hold fast to this principle of women's value, worth, equality, and advance it here at home, and not be hypocritical in calling for this inclusion of women, perhaps pointing to other countries. But for those of us, I'm a US citizen, so I'll say, my obligation as a citizen of this democracy is to hold leaders here accountable to this principle. Unless we do that, again, how can we be a helpful partner to women anywhere else?
Thank you so much. And that was so powerful. So we're going to start moving over to the Q&A section. So, if you're still using your Mentimeter, go ahead and have your student participants, please go ahead and enter in any questions you may have for the panelists. While we're collecting those different pieces, what I'd like us to do, because, obviously we're watching the media, seeing things that are going on around the world, and it could really bring us into a place of despair and like, nothing I do is going to matter. How does this impact? So what kind of guiding light words, right? What kind of motivating kind of tip or highlight that can you provide the participants to encourage them to keep up, the good work, that there's still things that are going on? I'll kind of go ahead and start because I already see some questions here as far as other minority groups. And so let's be clear on one thing. When we advocate for equal rights for one set of groups, other minority groups benefit as well, right? So if we are talking about, advocating for rights for women, that's going to also positively impact the LGBTQ plus community. If we're talking about moving and giving more voice to the Black experience in the US, that is also going to open up conversations for equality for those that are immigrants. So what we don't want to do, and I think it's almost divisive sometimes, is that separating us, like, oh no, this is an indigenous group situation. Yes, but by shedding light in things that are inequality within indigenous groups here in the US, also sheds light into other minority groups. So whatever that causes is being mindful of the experience of other minorities and subgroups, and that way we're kind of collaborating and pushing forward together. So that's my kind of spiel there. Like, right, when we're doing the work, we're doing the work, and always being mindful that, like, I may be here advocating for women's rights, but I'm shedding light into an inequality within our country that then helps another group as well. So keeping those pieces in mind. I don't know which panelists would like to go next with their guide. Oh, Abigail's ready. Abigail's hand went up. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Raquel. I think what you mentioned is very, very important. And I would love to also add something that hasn't been discussed yet, but it's also so important. As the first state mentions also, like, prioritize ourselves and our mental health. It is important to prioritize our mental health with fighting for gender equality, because activism and advocacy can be emotionally taxing work, right? Often, like, involves confronting system oppression, changing harmful beliefs, attitudes. So becoming a fighter for gender equality is hurtful. It's hurtful because you cut so many people from your lives when you start seeing this perspective of life with these kind of lenses. And taking care of one's mental health, of course, it is also a privilege, and it shouldn't be. We also should have the general right to take care of our mental health. But if you're able to please prioritize your mental health, it can help to prevent burnout, increase your resilience in the fight, and improve overall well-being. Fighting for gender equality is a marathon. It is not a sprint. Prioritizing mental health is crucial for staying motivated and effective in the long run. So if you need to take a break for sometimes in your own fight, it's okay. Take some rest, breathe, talk to people, and then come back with resilience and be compassionate with yourself. And yeah, if you want to be empathetic, first you need to be empathetic with yourself as well.
Excellent. Thank you. That's such a valuable point. I just said mindful. I know we have 1 more minute, and so that's the 1:30 mark. If you want to stay in and still continue the conversation, you're more than welcome to. But we definitely want to hear from the rest of our panelists. But understanding that, you know, we have busy lives and we kind of block out this time. So if you have to leave, thank you so much for joining us. And if you're staying in for the conversation, we're glad to have you. Okay, so Allyson, is there a point for you to share?
Yes, I think when you ask about what word of inspiration can we offer, I'll share something that is maybe distinctive to my background. I just want to offer to the students out there that if you are a part of a religious community that does not value women as full equals, I want you to know that there are alternatives, that there are many communities of faith that do include women, that do afford women that minimum dignity of full equality. And one of the places that I take inspiration is some of the faith leaders historically who have stood for women's equality and rights. So I can remember the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray, who was so important in laying the groundwork for a lot of the advocacy and litigation Ruth Bader Ginsburg did. I can think of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who fully supported women's liberation and said, we won't move forward as a society unless women have justice and equality. And then lastly, I'll remember the late Father Robert Drinan, who was a Jesuit priest who I had the pleasure of studying from at Georgetown, who long advocated the ERA and CEDAW, and he was at the margins of his community as a result. But this is just to tell you that there are faith leaders out there who are for gender equality. And if you're not proximate to them in your communities now, look for them or please reach out to me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So then we're going to go to Fawzia and then Susanne.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to highlight the relationship between, these religious extremist groups, the religion, and then women. I think most of the time, these religious extremist groups like Daesh, Taliban, or Al-Qaeda, or other military groups that use religion as a weapon to pursue their political agendas, if you ask them their economic policy, for instance, for the country, their social policy, their, any other policy, they don't have it. And the easy way to sustain power is by, bringing the so-called sexy words, saying, well, as long as women are deprived, then religion will be protected. On the contrary, actually, what they do is against Islamic principles, at least in the case of Taliban, because since they came to power, almost 1.5 years, they have issued 36 edicts and decrees to eliminate women's rights. So each meant they issue 2 edicts or decrees to eliminate women's rights. But if you ask them how many policies you issued to empower economy of the country, to bring rule of law, to change the life of people, 0. So that's if you look at in Afghanistan, in Iran, most of these countries that have a policy of exclusion, they use women, which actually the policy has no space in religion. If you go, and that is, as a feminist, that's also my fight. We want Islamic rights of women, which is actually Taliban afraid of. They don't give Islamic rights of women. They give their own interpretation, very narrow-minded, patriarchal interpretation of women's rights from their own perspective. So in many occasions, we have to challenge that, because I don't think it's actually anything that has got to do with Islam or any religion. Thank you.
Excellent points. Thank you. And then Susanne, you're the big closer here.
I don't know if that was in the right order. I just building on off of what everybody before said, very, very thought-provoking. But I think point of sort of encouragement. I think number one, based on what Abigail said in terms of self-care and self health, paying attention on our health. I think also once we do that, let's all be aware of the power that we have. We are all individuals that can influence society. We can all do that. Okay, so don't think you are less influential that you actually can be. Of course, it's a lot of work. We have also heard that, right? And then I think it's very important to think of oneself as actually being connected to your society, be part of your society, right? I just want to say, I'm sure that many of you are aware of this, but just today, the Florida legislature passed a law that installs in Florida a 6-week abortion ban, which is, I think, it's such a increase of the sort of rollback of rights that started with Roe v. Wade last year, right? And that just happened. And I think we need to know those things. I think we have to think about what this means for our communities, what it means for our neighbors, many other things that are happening, that are politically happening in the state. That's something that we can actually all influence. We are not doing it enough right now. There's a lot of other people who influence in a different direction, which actually goes into a pushback of women's rights, right? So we have that here in the United States as well. And so it's our responsibility to shape our society. And Allyson said before that as a citizen of this country, right, you have a responsibility for this democracy. And I think that's very important. So the power that we have, especially when we work together, and the responsibility that we have to take to allow everybody alive in self-determination and in general well-being. I think that's sort of the idea. And I think we all, if we are not doing it, it's not happening, so we have to do it.
Excellent. That is so important to stay relevant and be part of the community and conversation. Thank you so much, panelists. I also want to thank the TTR team for bringing us together to have these different conversations that are so important in this time. So participants, thank you so much for hanging in with us. It was a great conversation, and hopefully, it was a lot of takeaways. So if they have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us or all of us, and we're happy to continue these conversations offline. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
That there was a waterfall of thank yous coming in through the chat, so I just want to express as a collective thank you from everyone that has been here and has been giving absolutely fabulous feedback in the chat. Thank you so much for making yourselves so available and giving so much of yourselves to this conversation and to our undergraduate, our student community in general. So before we go, just a quick shout out for next week. We do have our final TTR next week. We will be highlighting the Millennium Fellowship as a leadership opportunity. So Anna Prado, our assistant director, is leading us in a discussion, finding your inner leader through the Millennium Fellowship. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I know some of you were reaching out in the chat. My email is mczaldi@fiu.edu. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye.